Now that the lunatic from Mar-a-Lago has left Ohio, we gotta talk. You know, Ohio, this November, is gonna be very close. Very, very close. And you don't know which way it's gonna go. Even I don't know which way it's gonna go. But I know it's gonna be razor close. Because, well, you have really two entities battling that out in Ohio. J.D. Vance is likely to be the Republican Party nominee for the Senate seat in Ohio. And Tim Ryan is likely to be the Democrat nominee for the Senate seat in Ohio. Both men are polar opposites of each other. Now, I'm not going to endorse because the primary is still underway. And the Democrats have another candidate who's running, Morgan Harper. And we really, really like Morgan Harper. So we're not going to endorse. But this is a hypothetical situation that in the fall, the race for the Senate seat is between J.D. Vance and Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio. Now, in that eventuality, we'll be supporting whoever isn't J.D. Vance. And I'm going to tell you exactly why. We would never ever support J.D. Vance. The reasons are long and numerous. Very long and numerous. But you notice J.D. Vance is not telling you about himself. And there's good reason for that. Because if you knew who J.D. Vance was, you probably wouldn't vote for him either. Now, he's going all around the state, flooding the airwaves, telling everybody that the lunatic from Mar-a-Lago endorsed him. Everyone in Ohio is being inundated by television campaign ads saying that the lunatic from Mar-a-Lago endorsed J.D. Vance. Now, the lunatic from Mar-a-Lago went to Delaware, Ohio, and he endorsed J.D. Vance. And he said at this rally, I'm paraphrasing, that J.D. Vance said some really bad things, or really not nice things about him. But a lot of people did. And well, he's letting bygones be bygones. Now, on the surface, that sounds reasonable. People say bad things about you. And then, well, they find out. And then they change their minds. Reasonable is when you say, I think this person is a lousy person. And they turn out to be a really, really good person. And you walk back and you say, well, in hindsight, I was wrong. This person did X, Y, and Z. And they're not lousy like I originally thought. My bad. We can all agree that that's normal. Everybody does that. So when J.D. Vance said that he would have to hold his nose and vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and now he's a Trump supporter, that's reasonable. A lot of politicians and things like that, they change. Average person, we change. So that's understandable. But J.D. Vance, come August and September, he's going to have to explain to the citizens of Ohio the stuff that's completely unreasonable and unrealistic to believe that anybody can change their opinion so quickly about it. You know, I think Donald Trump is a loudmouth lunatic. There's that kind of thing where you can change. But J.D. Vance didn't just say that Donald Trump was not a nice person. He was very specific. You see, we started off this show, the very first episode. You can go and find it on YouTube. And we said that we're endorsing Biden-Harris. And we gave out a litany of reasons why we were endorsing Biden-Harris. And we were voting. For the first time, the Purple People's Owl voted. And the central crux of the reason why in 2020 we chose Biden-Harris was because of what happened those 4 years, especially the final year under coronavirus with the lunatic from Mar-a-Lago. There was the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, where you had the Tiki Torch kids, or white supremacists, chanting blood and sword, and Jews shall not replace us. You know, and then the next day, what do you expect? Violence. Alex Fields Jr. got into his car and drove into a Black Lives Matter crowd, murdering Heather Hayes, our comrade. Now, upon the President of the United States learning that this happened in his country under his watch, he held a press conference where he said that they were very fine people on both sides. The night before, we all know that those were Nazis. Richard Spencer, you can go and get all the testimony from that trial. You go and you listen to what they said about fellow human beings. How they wanted to murder and commit violence. You know, at one time, all of those people were on Twitter. And then they were deplatformed because of the hatred and the violence that they were spreading on the platform. But now you have a free speech absolutist who might end up owning Twitter. I'm certain that those people will want to be back on the platform. But you see, a lot of that was planned online. A lot of who was going to do the logistics, all of that was planned online. They had Facebook groups. There were social media posts, Gab, Parler. So when people say that no violence happens as a result of social media and people plotting violence, that's not true. Unite the Right was planned solely by social media platforms, multiple. It wasn't just one. And violence did take place. And they were prepared to do more violence. Charlottesville, Virginia. You look it up. As soon as the lunatic from Mar-a-Lago got into office. Now, that was one of our central reasons for endorsing Biden-Harris. As it turns out, that was the central reason for the current president, Joe Biden, to even run for office. You see that kind of thing bubbling up in your country. And you know, we said in the video that it was reminiscent of what Adolf Hitler did in the 1930s. I said, this man is trying to be the reincarnation of Adolf Hitler. Now, guess who agreed with me in 2016? J.D. Vance. He went a step further than me. He said America's Adolf Hitler is Donald Trump. That came out of J.D. Vance's mouth America's Adolf Hitler is Donald Trump. Now, that's not just a nice thing to say about a person. That's an accusation of substantial weight and proportionality. We said the same thing in our very first video. And then J.D. Vance went further. He said that Donald Trump was a white supremacist who hates black Americans. Those are J.D. Vance's words. We agree. And we said that in our very first video, based off of what he did surrounding the George Floyd protests. So, J.D. Vance can talk all he wants now to try to secure the conservative nomination for his party about Donald Trump. But in the fall, when you're talking to all the citizens of Ohio, you're going to have to explain on the debate stage how in 6 years you changed and had an evolution from Donald Trump being America's Adolf Hitler to now you're telling everybody in Ohio you're his best buddy. That's not normal. Let's just put it at that. And then you said he was a white supremacist who hated black Americans. Clearly you know of examples where he's done this, because you wouldn't have said it otherwise. But now you're telling everybody that you won his endorsement and he's the best thing since sliced bread. This is interesting. If I'm on the debate stage, I'm turning to J.D. Vance and saying, wait a minute, J.D. You're telling us now that the person who's running around the state campaigning and endorsing you isn't what you called America's Adolf Hitler. What changed, J.D.? Because you called him America's Adolf Hitler. You said that he was a white supremacist who hated black Americans. You gotta give examples as to how that's not true anymore. Because those are not nice things. They're not just not nice things. They're brutal. They're the worst things you can say about anyone, ever, period. You're Adolf Hitler and you hate black Americans. And this is the person who now you're telling everyone is endorse you. What a disgrace. And he hasn't explained himself. He's just said, well, I've had a complete change of heart and mind. But you gotta be more specific. What happened in 6 years that he went from being America's Adolf Hitler to now being the best thing since sliced bread? We want to know. We really want to know. I want to know. Because our position has remained consistent since the very beginning. And you notice J.D. Vance is talking about the lunatic from Mar-a-Lago. Now, when you're not from the state originally, as Tim Ryan is, Tim Ryan has roots in Ohio to go way back. J.D. Vance is another carpetbagger, just like Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. J.D. Vance is doing the same thing in Ohio. And you know, he doesn't want to talk about what he's done outside of being in the Marines. He'll talk about his active duty. But the vast majority of his life, he didn't spend in the Marines. The vast majority of it has been in Silicon Valley. And you know, he's got a record out there. And it's not good. Maybe that's why he's run to Ohio. To escape the people who were, well, on his case in Silicon Valley. J.D. Vance is good friends and is solely being funded by a fellow by the name of Peter Thiel. Now, Peter Thiel, you got to go back to the .com era when the internet was just starting off. You remember PayPal? That's how Peter Thiel made most of his fortune. He was a co-founder of PayPal. Now, Peter Thiel is notoriously known all over the tech world in Silicon Valley as someone who hates unions. Now, I said unions in this title because it's very important. Ohio is a union state. No, the majority of workers are not in a union, but a large portion are. And J.D. Vance is Peter Thiel's lapdog. Basically, when J.D. Vance went out to Silicon Valley, he was trained in the business by his mentor, Peter Thiel. So when you find out that Peter Thiel has written a $13 million check and then another $10 million check to a dark money super PAC to support J.D. Vance, now you know the reasons why. They're best of buddies, and they both have a record of being very anti-union. When anybody tried to unionize, or even the thought of it was, well, just an infancy, it was Peter Thiel who was brought in to crush anyone who was organizing potentially for a union in Silicon Valley. It's a well-known fact. And J.D. Vance was right there along with him. So they hate unions. Now, J.D. Vance will do this song and dance. I'm America first. But if I'm Tim Ryan, I'm saying, wait a minute. J.D., hold up. You're saying you're America first. But when you were in California, working for big tech, you put American workers last. You were in charge of the union busing thing. You didn't want unions at all in any tech firms. Your buddy was solely funding you and giving you millions of dollars in dark money. He hates unions. Now, I don't know if J.D. Vance knows much about Ohio, but the post office workers, they're in a union. The pipe fitters, they're in a union. The electric workers, they're in a union. The police, they even have a union. The teachers have a union. There's a lot of unions in Ohio. It's a union state. It's always been union. J.D. Vance is not for unions. He's one of the most anti-union candidates that's running in 2022 on the ballot for a major governmental office position. He's one of the major ones. Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance hate unions. So when they're running in the fall saying America first, you just remember I told you, being on the West Coast, that they put the American workers last. They didn't give a fuck about the tech workers. You hear all of this, oh, tech workers make a lot of money. A lot of these firms do RSUs, restricted stock units. Basically, they don't pay you a salary. They pay you in the stock of their company. That's how they get the best employees, the most talented. They give you a lot of stock in Twitter, a lot of stock in Facebook, a lot of stock in Instagram. When people wanted to unionize, just remember, on the West Coast, when people wanted to do it, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, J.D. Vance, they were all against it. You better know that, Ohio. You better know. what you're getting yourself into. I just wanted to warn you. Like the motion picture production studio. Now, maybe that's why J.D. Vance doesn't want to tell you about himself. He just wants to talk about the lunatic from Mar-a-Lago. Also, it should be duly noted that J.D. Vance is a lunatic. I know the Republicans blew it big time. They had Mike Gibbons and Josh Mandel. Josh Mandel, as Fruit Loopy as he is, would have been a very difficult candidate to beat in the fall. He's from Ohio at least. He knows the state. He's not a carpetbagger like J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is just like Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's why she endorsed him. He won't get any work done. He will solely be a social media troll on Twitter, trying to supposedly own the libs. That'll be his sole job in the Senate. Now, while you struggle to keep your jobs, and while he sails out to the big interests of Peter Thiel, who's giving him $23 million. Can you imagine this? One individual, American oligarch, Peter Thiel, has given a super PAC $23 million to support J.D. Vance. And the Ohio citizens, you don't know this, but when you see most of those ads supporting J.D. Vance, they're being paid for solely by Peter Thiel, who I already told you what his opinion about unions were. So if you're in the union, you better get out and support Tim Ryan this fall. You don't have very much choice. You want to talk about the unhoused problem on the West Coast. A lot of that was a result of people not being able to collectively organize and bargain, because you had these tech executives, not all, but some, who hated and despised unions and went out of their way to employ dirty tactics and tricks to ensure that no unions were ever formed. Don't you find it surprising that in none of these tech startup companies there's any unionization? Well, if you want to know who wrote the entire playbook on how to avoid having unions, look no further than Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance. That's also a thing you can talk about. People are frustrated with social media and the division. Who do you think allowed for all of this divisive content to be on so many social media platforms? People like J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel. So when he talks about cancel culture this fall and critical race theory, I think Tim Ryan is going to turn to him and tell him, sir, you were out there in Silicon Valley. We don't know what you do out there. We're from Ohio. We do work with our hands. But we know that you were out there configuring that algorithm with Peter Thiel, who's giving you $23 million. So if you want to talk about division online, you were the one who was responsible for allowing it, and maybe in fact even putting it up in the first place. And Tim Ryan wouldn't be lying. It'd be a home run like Mark McGwire out the park. Because Peter Thiel has been executive and worked in high-level positions at Facebook. You know where all the QAnon shit was, where all the COVID-19 disinformation shit was. People just want to center their blame on one person, Mark Zuckerberg. And that's fine. You can criticize the decisions made by the individual who heads the company. But there's a lot of executives and board of directors who you don't see, who are not very well known, who are just as influential and maybe even more than some of the founders of these companies. What I'm trying to say is J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel, they're the ones that kept a lot of this garbage under the guise of freedom of speech online, that stoked all this division in the first place. So when he comes out there trying to run on America First bullshit, which is nothing but divisionist tactics, you tell him you're the one that started this out in Silicon Valley. And we don't want this in Dayton, Ohio. We don't want this in Akron or Youngstown or Cleveland, Cincinnati. We don't want this in Lima. We don't want this in Delaware. We don't want this in Columbus. You take your carpet bag back to Silicon Valley. And I don't even think he can come back here. You gotta hit him with the facts. Because there's a reason J.D. Vance doesn't want to tell you who he is. Here goes an individual who attacked a retired Hall of Fame American general, Barry McCaffrey. He said that he was a drunk and didn't know how to win wars. Now Barry McCaffrey has 3 Purple Hearts, 2 of the highest medals that you can win for valor, 2 Silver Hearts. This is an individual, whether you like or agree with his philosophy or not, that knows his shit. And any serviceman, as J.D. Vance once was, ought to know 3 things. 1, you never attack your elders. 2, you never attack people that are higher in rank than you are. And 3, you don't say things about another serviceman that aren't true before you validate it. The general came online and said, I don't even drink. He didn't have to defend himself about his war record. If you've ever heard of the famous Operation Left Hook, it was drawn up and pioneered by General Barry McCaffrey. He's a legend at the American War College. We know these things. J.D. Vance should too. We also know that the lunatic from Mar-a-Lago talked a lot about using the Insurrection Act here specifically and occupied the Wamish territory. And we know why too. Now, you're not supposed to willy-nilly talk about using the military against your own citizenry in a free and fair democratic republic. I don't remember that written anywhere. Now there are special circumstances, but we weren't attempting to overthrow the government like you saw happen on January 6th from the radical far right. No, we weren't out there doing what they were doing, the Nazis in Charlottesville. For 4 years under the lunatic from Mar-a-Lago, we were defending and protecting ourselves from violence at the hands of far-right conservative white supremacists. And they had a champion in the White House who, anytime we stood up and fought back for ourselves, would tell us that we're socialists and anarchists, and that he was going to send in the military, whether the cities wanted to or not. You remember what they did in Portland. First, they had their thugs drive by in the back of pickup trucks and shoot the residents of Portland with paintballs. Oh yes, they first assaulted us that way. And then he sent in, zip recruiter, thugs. You know, they hired a bunch of paramilitary people and gave them fancy, dark-looking costumes and snatched up people on the street who were protesting against the George Floyd lynching in America. This is all the things that were going on right next door. Here you had, a department that's been under consent decree since 2015, SPD. They use munitions, chemical gases on their own citizens. 60,000 citizens were in downtown Seattle protesting against the lynching of George Floyd. One of the largest protests that took place was in this city. And he was watching. We know. You don't think I have intelligence. We know everything. He was watching to see if the city was going to hold against his invasion, his Nazi invasion. And you had SPD be told by a federal judge in this country that they violated their own citizens' human rights. We pay tax dollars to SPD to violate us as citizens. A federal judge told them that. And plus the city council said the same thing, that you violated the citizens' rights, their human rights, their free speech, the right to peacefully redress and protest. People were downtown protesting when this happened, in the middle of the daytime. But they didn't like who they were. So they brutalized and tortured us. And the president wanted to use the military to assassinate certain citizens. We happen to know that yours truly was on the list. We know this. Now, J.D. Vance supports an individual who wanted to do that to the American people. Now you're going to see, starting in June, January 6th, there are going to be public hearings about what took place on January 6th. That was the most racist event in American history. And I only hope that the January 6th committee will tell the American people the truth about why January 6th took place. Because we know. We know. But you don't know. And we know that you don't know. It was the most racist white supremacy event that has ever taken place in American history. They wanted to do that shit in 2008. And the only thing that prevented them from doing it in 2008 was the Republican nominee at the time, John McCain. They knew that John McCain would not support them trying to violently overthrow the nation because an African American was elected president of the United States. Stuart Rose, Exhibit A. In 2008, right after Barack Obama was declared the president of the United States, went on a social media platform and stated, "It's time for civil war." I'm just telling you the facts. In 2020, we had the first African American female vice president elected in this nation's history by the most voters who've ever cast a vote in this nation's history. 81 million votes. Read it and weep, bitches. And they stormed the nation's capital because they didn't want a black woman to be vice president. They'll tell you, "Oh, no, that's not why we did it." No. That's exactly why you did it. That's why the lunatic from Mar-a-Lago told the big lie. That the election was stolen in the major inner cities. Now, who lives in the inner cities? Isn't that where predominantly people of color live in America? Philadelphia, Atlanta, Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit. Ooh, don't they sound scary? There's violence. There must be black people around. Maybe that's why J.D. Vance said that Donald Trump was a white supremacist and hated black Americans. Because he was listening to, well, what he was going to say in 2020. Once he took the L. You know, you got to learn how to take the L. You lost. Just take an L. But he couldn't do it. He couldn't believe that we kicked his fucking ass. I told you we were. And if that son of a bitch runs again, we'll fire his fucking ass again. You know, JD is going to have to answer to why he supports a president wanting to send in the National Guard and the military to murder American citizens. Now, JD is not familiar all that much with Ohio, but I am. In the 1960s, during civil unrest, there was a protest at Kent State University in Ohio. And the National Guard opened fire on peaceful protesters, murdering 3 Kent State students. Most people don't know that this happened in the 1960s in America. That the National Guard murdered Kent State students who were protesting against the Vietnam War in America. So it's no laughing matter when you have a president who's a lunatic say that he's going to send in the National Guard to put down American citizens from the White House. Yes, we saw this in the cabinet room. He's sitting amongst his whole entire cabinet. This is the President of the United States sitting amongst his entire cabinet, saying we're going to put down yours truly. We know. We'll never forget. Ohio is familiar with that happening. It happened at Kent State. If I'm Congressman Ryan, I'm going to Kent State. And I'm going to hammer J.D. Vance on his derelict of knowledge and duty in regards to the military. And I'm certain General Barry McCaffrey will join Congressman Tim Ryan in that criticism. You know who else might join him? One of his own fellow conservatives, who actually is using his brain. He sits on the January 6th committee, and he's not running for re-election. And the last time I looked, the great state of Illinois, the land of Lincoln, it borders Ohio. So we know Ohio very well. We know Indiana. We know Michigan. We know Iowa. Adam Kinzinger knows Ohioans just like Tim Ryan does. And wouldn't that be great in the fall to see Tim and Adam on a bus campaigning all across Ohio, explaining exactly why J.D. Vance is the most unqualified individual to ever be a United States Senator in this country. There are some people that really shouldn't be senators already. And J.D. Vance will make them look pale in comparison. The midterms are going to be closer than what most people think. You're looking at a snapshot right now. But you don't have the complete portrait. When you finally hear what happened on January 6th, at the beginning of this summer, you're going to have the portrait that you need to make a determination about a bunch of things. The first thing, what direction you want to go in as a citizenry, now that you know that this country is deeply divided. Because you're going to learn that this country is very, very deeply divided. The next thing you're going to have to make a decision about are the individual choices that you have in November. Do you want to return someone who's loyal to the lunatic from Mar-a-Lago, who allowed this nation to become what it is right now? Do you want to send one of his henchmen to the Senate? Because in 2024, we all know he's going to attempt it again. He's going to attempt another coup. And we don't want that one to be successful. But J.D. Vance does. Once you learn about the coup, then you gotta wonder, are you gonna vote for people who sympathize with it? And your last choice is this. Once we get what we want, people elected, we've got to force them to make the difficult and necessary choices to move forward. We're able to force any difficult choices with J.D. Vance. We know what's going to happen. If you put in sympathizers to January 6th, there's two choices that will happen. One is mass civil unrest and civil war. And the other is a complete and utter exodus from this empire. So those are your choices. You don't know those are your choices yet, but you will soon. This midterm, this is a battle, a real battle for the soul of this nation. We know that some people are America's Adolf Hitler, and that they're so white supremacist that they hate black Americans. J.D. Vance knew this of Donald Trump, and now he's trying to pretend that he doesn't know this now. So you have to wonder if that's what you vote for and you get, what you expect to happen to this country. I hope people will make a wise and thoughtful decision.